most influential boxers of the past decade. This man is the most charitable, most uncontroversial, unproblematic person to date. And in today's video, I plan on discussing Jake Paul as a boxer and the ducking of Jake Paul and how his boxing career is not really that impressive. So sit back, get the hate comments and the dislikes absolutely set to go, and let's get into the video. God, this guy is oily. Anyways, welcome back, like, sub, and comment, and today, you know the video topic. So, to give you a brief overview, Jake Paul first fought this man, Deadly the Tank, in an effort to duck from KSI. Now, many may be saying, well, this event would have made more sense business-wise, but if you don't think that KSI and Jake Paul wouldn't have sold out the Manchester Arena and done over 1 million pay-per-view buys back in 2018, you're stupid. But, again, we're going to be using logic when talking about Jake Paul's ducking, so... Anyways, going back to Deadly for a minute. So basically Deadly, he looked like this. He didn't take the fight seriously. And while many people say that, well, Jake fought a boxer better than KSI, that's only true if Deadly trained hard, which he didn't, so he wasn't as full potential. He also got the nerves. And thirdly, he just let Jake bully him around, and we've clearly understood now that this man is not meant for boxing. Pure and simple. Now, when we got Jake Paul versus Deadly, it was a one-sided event. Deadly did manage to make his nose bleed, but that was pretty much the extent of it. And there was no good reason for Jake to duck KSI, because I guess Logan somehow had a better chance at beating him, even though they both hadn't boxed before, and they were athletes and they had competed in wrestling. But again, logic. That's my answer. Logic. So again, Jake Paul somehow had a lesser chance of beating KSI than Logan did, even though they both never boxed before, because logic. And if anything, people now say that Jake is better than Logan, so, I mean, that doesn't even make any sense, because it would have just shown that Jake still would have lost in 2018. Everyone can say that's true, but I think that he would have maybe done better than Logan. But again, logic. And so, sorry, we're not there yet. So, Jake fought Deadly. And why he didn't just decide to drop the fight when Deadly was literally getting hit and then going down in very embarrassing fashion. I mean, there was only one reason why he did this, and that was to be a bully to a man that was smaller in both height and weight, because classic bullies are insecure, and I think he's a very insecure little man who likes to fight smaller guys. And then, of course, he thought he was the best of the best, carrying around the belt wherever he went, and essentially saying that he was the new big thing, and acting as if the Deadly fight was an actual competitive event. And then we got Jake Paul versus... Hold on. Have a lot of stuff here. Crabman, Anisan Gib. And yes, this was quote-unquote Jake's toughest opponent. That was that guy. But let me tell you the thing. Jake Paul and Gib definitely was an overhyped fight. People definitely thought that Gib was better than he thought he was. I was guilty of that as well. I mean, like, KSI was spoiling Gib back in 2018 and absolutely being a one-sided bloodbath. Well, not bloodbath, but KSI was essentially beating him both times. And everything that Gib was hyped up to be and that people expected him to be were never true, because he was never any of those things. He was off balance. He put on one of the worst performances ever, and he only got good at boxing after he fought Jake. The fight that we got with Taylor, that technique, I think he never would have beaten Jake even with that technique, because I think Jake's just too powerful, and the weight was just too much of a difference. But what I will say is that if that was the way that Gib performed against Jake, Gib would have lived up to the hype, and everything that people were saying about him would have been true, and this would have been one of Jake's toughest fights, except it wasn't. And so somehow magically, because Jake Paul beat this guy, everyone magically thought that Jake Paul was going to destroy KSI, and It's not like this, because this fight was really no indicator or any way to say that Jake Paul would beat KSI easily. This fight, it made no sense that you would say that KSI would get absolutely obliterated when KSI and Gib are on two different levels, even to this day. But again, Jake loves the narrative of fights, that all of his fights are his toughest fights yet, and that he's taken this seriously, and that this fight was very easy. But nope, Jake doesn't want to admit that, because then this would be an invalid fight, which the majority of his fights are. So then we got our next fight, which was Nate versus Jake Paul. And this fight made sense because logic. Why Jake thought it was, he felt the need to fight a guy that had never boxed before. And yes, an athlete can be a good boxer, but Nate didn't take this seriously. And someone like KSI would take a fight like this super seriously, actually spar and take Jake seriously, because he knows what Jake is bringing to the table. And again, I think Jake Paul is not a bad boxer, but I think that he definitely is overhyped and put on a pedestal that he does not deserve to be on yet. And this fight made absolutely no sense except to flex his ego. And then when Jake did this to Nate Robinson, he compared himself to Ali and thought he was the best of the best. And his own coach has said that he could beat Conor. And you just don't say stuff like that after this fight, because then you look stupid and people are going to have a high expectation for your next opponent to be really good. And it really wasn't. I mean, how is this fight impressive when your opponent's footwork was literally jumping in midair? I'm not even joking. Literally going in midair. And who was literally, his head movement was coming at you with his head. I mean, I don't know what else to say to that, really. But just, this fight was just so not needed. And ultimately, Jake didn't need to fight a high-profile guy like Nate. He could have fought Faye Sensei, JMX, Josh Buchner, or whatever. I mean, those three fights are a lot more challenging for Jake. But again, it wouldn't make sense from a financial standpoint. But that's a Mike Tyson card, so he doesn't have to very much worry about whether or not he needs to sell a fight or whatever, have a very good opponent. And Nate was as dry as soybeans when they did their press conferences and whatnot. So yeah, this fight didn't make any sense, and it really didn't prove that Jake Paul was, could face off against the best of the best. And again, only the casuals would say that being an athlete is impressive. Quite literally, being an athlete doesn't mean anything in boxing. It's like a librarian, like saying like a librarian, like I beat a librarian, so I'm like the next Ali. It doesn't make any sense. This fight just made no sense. But again, logic says that it does make sense, because wow, he beat an athlete who had the boxing skills of I would say even below Bryce Hall. I'd say at the level of Bryce Hall. And I mean, if Addison Rae can do the bag better than you are, I mean, it just goes to show how low his opponents are. And I mean, if Jake wanted to say, oh, this is just a warm-up, a tune-up, it would make a lot more sense. We wouldn't be aggravated. But he tried to make it seem like he was the underdog the whole time, and it was the betting favorite, which he was. But he overestimates, he hypes up his opponents so that people, in the majority of the casuals, will think that these are actually impressive wins when they are the farthest thing from it. And then we got Ben Askren, which, I mean, this picture kind of says it all. And I mean, again, it's not like this guy, had an overrated chin and only won a lot of his fights because he was able to clinch, and he was a world-class wrestler. And when Jake posted this picture and he touted all of Ben Askren's accomplishments, it's not like any of that wasn't in wrestling. And it's not like, this guy had just come off of such of a hip surgery, and who, again, is not clearly a boxer, and who had the boxing skills of a YouTuber. But no. Those don't make any sense, because, again, logic. Logic says that, this was an actually impressive fight for Jake, when in reality, Ben Askren had never been hit with a shot like that before. And whether or not you want to admit it, put in Logan Paul, put in KSI, put in even Austin McBoom, the result will be the same, and that is Ben Askren on the canvas and getting beaten. But you know what? That doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people because of logic. So that doesn't make any sense. And that's pretty much where we are. So in summary, Jake Paul has essentially had a career where he's proven one thing: he can beat people in boxing that don't know how to box. So my slogan for you, Jake, is Jake Paul, established 2018. Beating people who don't know how to box and that are 3 to 4 inches smaller than me and about 10 to 15 pounds lighter than me since 2018. And that's pretty much what Jake hasn't said, pretty much shown. And again, I think Jake Paul has shown some good technical skill against all these opponents, despite them being super weak. But when your opponents are a lot weaker than you, you're going to look way better than you actually are. And we do know from, and Roundhouse Radio confirmed my statement, even though people said I was stupid, is that Jake doesn't do well under pressure. And that his footwork needs a lot of improvement, and that when he goes back is when he tends to fail, and he's got a long way to go. I'm sorry, but this image is funny. But yeah, so Jake has a lot to work on, and for his own coaches to say that he can beat Conor and not disagree with him when he talks about Canelo and says, oh, Jake Paul is got no flaws, and when his own coach is like, oh, his footwork doesn't need improvement, even that's what everyone's been saying, and he's continuing to do the same moves when he gets under pressure since January of 2020. But no, the guy's got no yes men. No, his camp is clearly being honest with him because, again, logic. But you know what? What do I know? What do I really know? You know, I believe that he's working hard, but I think that there's a bit of a yes man mentality, and I think that he's getting away with things that he normally wouldn't get away with if he was fighting good opponents. And the things that are working are going to work with good people, and I think he has a limited toolhouse, and I think BJ Flores is really yes man Flores, but nope, logic says otherwise. Anyways, he's now going to fight Mr. Woodley, and he looks as oily as ever here. And again, I think Woodley will be Jake's toughest opponent, but there's a caveat to that because I think that Woodley, if he boxes like Ben Askren and Nate and Gibb, I can easily invalidate this fight. However, I don't think that's going to happen, and my hope is that it is a challenging fight. But that's why I'm not saying that Woodley is going to win against Jake, and that's why I'm saying it's a 50-50. And yeah, because again, we've never seen Woodley be in a boxing fight, and we know that MMA fighters going into transitioning into boxing and boxing people going into MMA don't translate well. So that's why I'm still up in the air with the Woodley situation. Now people might say, well, you know, Jake clearly is doing something right because, you know, back in 2018, everyone would say Jake Paul versus Woodley. Jake gets completely destroyed. There's no way that's close. And that is true, and I'll give you guys that one. But I think this is purely because Jake has proven he's got a knockout power, and he does know how to fight people that don't necessarily know how to box. And with MMA fighters, they have a certain way of fighting. We saw Ben Askren going back to his old MMA style boxing. That's something that Woodley could do. And there's just like Jake is being trained in boxing, and Woodley has been, but on and off. And Jake's had multiple fights. He's been doing this consistently. And an MMA fighter might not be able to pick apart or see things that a professional boxer like Tommy Fury, or even to an extent KSI, would be able to see. Now, we've gotten you all caught up. Let's talk about him and his ducking. So, obviously, Jake ducked KSI, but we went over that. And then he tried to duck from a little guy named Dylan Moran. Dylan Moran, who basically said that, and Jake started this whole thing by making fun of Dylan for boxing Conor when Conor complimented Dylan on his boxing skills. And Dylan didn't even want to fight Jake in an event. He just wanted to do a sparring match, because if Jake was actually about this life and a real boxer like he says he is, he would have accepted this offer, but except Jake didn't because logic. Even though, and people are like, oh, well, Dylan, you know, fights bums, but I mean, if anything, all of Jake's opponents might as well be 0-20, because that's how they fight, and that's how they look, and that's how they get defeated. And Jake Paul is essentially doing the same thing that other boxers do, which is padding his record, because he's boxing in a business sense instead of fighting like a real boxer does, like Mike Tyson. But anyways, and obviously none of what I said is true because logic. Anyways, and then Dylan Moran might have actually fought in Jake instead of Ben, but Jake said no, and then that all stopped. And the thing is Dylan Moran probably would run through Jake Paul, but if Jake somehow managed to win, it would perfectly set up the Conor fight. And again, if Jake's gonna call out all these people and say these bold things, and his team's gonna back him up, we expect you to level up the competition significantly and put your hands or your fists where your mouth is. But you don't do that, and you duck Dylan Moran. Plain and simple. I mean, that would be like if KSI said no, I'm not gonna box you, Adam Sala. People would be like, you're ducking Adam Sala. So I don't know why people have that double standard and don't call out Jake when he refuses to box Dylan Moran in a gym, not even gonna be filmed. And then we got Tommy Fury, which, again, is the fight that everybody wanted after the Ben Askren fight. Even Shirley was like, Jake, if you're not going to fight a real boxer, we can't have you. And so he went to Showtime. Even they know. Now, Tommy Fury, like Roundhouse Radio would surmise so well, would go through Jake pretty easily, but I think that would be a pretty competitive fight. And again, this is, you give people the fight that they want, and the problem with boxing is we're getting fights we don't want, and Jake's basically continuing on that lineage of doing this to the fans. And this is Jake's real chance to fight a real pro boxer, but no, he didn't want to do that, and he said, I'll do it in a few years. And it's funny that he says anytime, any place, when quite literally Tommy Fury has been asking for that fight for years. And and the thing is Jake likes to boast. And here's the thing, I only have this expectation for Jake because he talks so much. For KSI and Logan, they don't talk this way. They don't say, I can beat Canelo or this and that. Obviously, JJ said that he could fight Floyd or beat him and all that stuff, and Logan said that too. But when you watch those videos, there's that glow of self-awareness, of laughing at yourself and not taking it too seriously. Like when I hear KSI say stuff like that, and Logan, I don't take it 100% seriously. They're not fully on it or fully serious. There might be some debate on that, but I think that's what most people would agree on. Whereas with Jake, he 100% believes that, and his team believes that. Like, JJ said, like, I could beat Mike Tyson. He was saying that drunk, and then Vidal was like, no, you wouldn't. Like, that's what BJ Flores should have said when Jake said, I can beat Canelo in 3 years. I can beat Conor this year. I have the technical skills to do that. And if you're going to hype yourself up so much, you're going to say you're doing all this with your sparring partners, for you then to not fight, to then continue to fight bums, it just shows a lack of confidence and ultimately being fraudulent. And basically he's manipulated people into believing that he's leveling up the competition by going from a YouTuber to an athlete to a MMA fighter to another MMA fighter. But the thing is if those are just titles. Those are fancy things to distract. But when you look at the cold hard facts, Ben Askren and Nate Robinson might as well have been YouTubers because that's how they boxed. And so in essence, Jake Paul has never had a real fight, has never fought a real fighter, and hopefully Woodley will prove that. And this will be his first real fight and be his first real time against a real fighter. But if it's not, this whole narrative that I am telling you guys continues. You just don't want to believe that because Jake Paul has somehow infested the minds of a lot of 12-year-olds and people that think they know what they're talking about when it comes to YouTube boxing, when actually you don't. And I'm sorry, but I think Jake's a great, I think he's a fine boxer. But I don't think he's at this pedestal, and I really wish that people would see the way I see things, because the way I see it is Jake Paul is one of the biggest duckers in boxing history, and unlike his brother who was willing to fight Floyd, KSI was willing to do a fight with Logan, 10 ounce gloves, no headgear, and go from Joe to Logan. Like, that's respectable. Gib losing horrendously to Jake, then fighting the quote-unquote best TikToker. Like, those guys have commendable respect. They put their fists where their mouths were. They weren't caring about the stocks or the relevancy of the club. They showed that they were passionate about it and that they actually backed up the confidence. And that's what I respect. And Jake doesn't do that, and so that's why I don't think he's as confident, and I don't have respect for him, and I don't think he's done anything impressive except box people who don't know how to box and not taking the fights that everybody wants to see and that would actually shut up all the haters or prove them all wrong. But Jake doesn't want to do this because he is not all that. But you know what? Everything I said just doesn't make any sense, and clearly I'm wrong because logic says otherwise. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much the epitome of Jake Paul's boxing career and his ducking of a variety of people. Obviously, nothing I'm saying is true because logic says that I'm somehow wrong. It's not like this guy, was this guy was clearly a challenge because logic. Anyways, guys, video has gone on for too long. Make sure to dislike, make a hate comment, do whatever you want, and I will see you guys soon. It's every day, bro.